Christy brought up the era in which this was written, and I hadn't considered that before about how it was received. Did white people even read it? If they did they read it and go, oh, maybe we're being asses and should start being nicer? Or was it just the people that were being treated like this? Was it just the blacks that read it going, well, why did he write this? We already know we're being treated like this.
Did anybody look into the reception?
I didn't look into it, but if you remember in the ethics of Jim Crow, how he had to, I think it was in the ethics of Jim Crow, where if he wanted to read, he got other people,
Right.
or the person that he worked for, he asked if he could get books for him, and he was like, yeah, whatever. So, I mean, you have to kind of think black people couldn't read or didn't have the
Couldn't borrow books from the library.
Yeah,
They could read.
Allowed to read.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the allowed to read.
so you kind of have to think that the white people were probably the first to get their hands on this, maybe.
But would they have? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Would they?
Yeah.
They read Harriet Jacobs.
Well, that was a different time and with a different purpose.
Yeah, but it was 100 years before. So, and you have to think, out of the South, it would have been read.
Why I guess past this remote, I don't know.
I think if once you got out of the South, it was probably read.
Okay.
But in this, it says that when he added the two other, the ethics of Jim Crow and then Bright and Morning Star, because
Not you. No.
She's laughing at me just giving up and moving it with my hand.
okay, because it says that he added it because he didn't want white people to only cry over the stories and feel good about it. So I guess white people did read it and felt sorry, but didn't change afterwards.
All right. So I think we have. Are you looking at something?
In the introduction, it talks about
The
it
reception
was an immediate hit with
I read that. I
everyone.
promise. I
Yeah.
don't.
with everyone.
It's created an immediate sensation in the spring of 1938.
Okay. So that's in the biographical or the introduction. It's sort of biographical. It's heavily a biographical introduction, and not all editions have that. Only this, I think, the perennial edition celebrating the centennial of his life, of his birth, has it. Also, at the back of the book, if you have this edition, there's a sort of timeline of his life. After the notes on the text, you get into the gray PS section that has the chronology of Richard Wright, his life and his works. Back to me. So it was. No, I'm turning this off. I quit with the remote because it keeps wobbling and I don't understand. It was a smash hit, and Richard Wright was a popular author. If you've read the intro or any of the kind of chronology or any background information about the book, these were also prize-winning stories. The Fire in the Cloud won the short story prize in Story Magazine, which is just a fiction magazine. So he was known in the literary world. And then Bright and Morning Star was included in, I believe it was Harper's, someone's collection of the 100 best stories, 50 best short stories from 1917 to 1947, something like that. Maybe it was 57. 50 stories, 50 years. It's in the introduction. So these were stories that circulated before the book was put together, and were lauded by critics and available in trade publications and in fiction publications. So Richard Wright was already sort of a known quantity at this point. And his readership was diverse in terms of race. But as the man himself said, he also was concerned about his white audience and who that was. And probably, though he wouldn't outright say it, concerned about the effect of his book on his black readership as well. Because above all else, he wanted action, which we see over and again in the stories. But he also hoped that his book would make people act. So that's why, as Marion said, he didn't want just white people being sad about the things that happened in the book. He wanted them to be inspired to make change happen. And I think that's something that applies to all of his readership. So it was a bestseller, it was popular, but still he was concerned with how the book was received and who was reading it and why they were reading it and what they were getting out of it. So that's part of why he added the Ethics of Jim Crow essay about his life, his experiences growing up, and then added Bright and Morning Star at the end after having written and published that story, or written it intending for it to be in the collection, and then they said, there's too many pages, it'll be too expensive. So it was originally supposed to be in the first edition, but then was cut for economic reasons, because the publisher said, it'll cost more to print if it has this many more pages. And these are things that happen. They budget so many pages per year at publishing houses. And if you ever get to the point in your life where you're writing a book proposal, or have a book that you're trying to get published, you have to, when you write the book proposal, you have to say how many pages you intend it to be. And they hold you to that because it's in their budget of pages they can print per year.
It's good to know.
So that's what happened to Richard Wright, is that he had too many pages. So they cut Bright and Morning Star. But then, like Marion said, when the time for the second edition came, he said, I want this story in it, I will pay for it myself, and I want the Ethics of Jim Crow to be at the beginning. I will also pay for that, take it out of what you're going to pay me, or I'll pay you out of what I made off the book earlier. But this is how I want it to be, this is how it should be. So it's a work that evolved, so its meaning evolves, because it's one thing to read it without the essay at the beginning and without Bright and Morning Star at the end, and then another thing to read it as the whole sort of final version that we have now. If that makes sense. They may not be major earth-shaking changes in your understanding of the text, but it still changes what the text means when you add things to it, especially when you add nonfiction to a fiction text. So adding that essay changes something about our understanding when he says, here is this piece talking about real life and my life that somehow goes along with these fictional stories that I'm about to tell you. And you'll see how, or you won't. But I think including the nonfiction essay at the beginning is supposed to make us think about the relationship between fiction and nonfiction.